Hello and welcome to our broadcast today, Intersectionality at Work, LGBTQ plus support, and content in ethnic studies. My name is Michelle Herczog. I'm the Coordinator 3 for History Social Science, leading a lot of the work to support schools and districts with implementing ethnic studies, which, as we know, is a high school graduation requirement coming up very, very soon. I'm really honored and thrilled to have my colleague Tonya Moore with me. She is also Coordinator 3, but for physical education and comprehensive health. We both work in the Division of Curriculum and Instructional Services here at the Los Angeles County Office of Education. But Tonya also has a really other great title. She's the State Director of the PRISM Project. Tonya, before we get going, tell them a little bit about the PRISM Project.
Absolutely. PRISM Project stands for Providing Relevant, Inclusive Support That Matters for LGBTQ Students. This is a statewide project that really aims to increase cultural competency for all educators in California. So LACO's really fortunate to lead this project as we're in real time developing these online courses that will be ready and available to all educators in California by June 30th, 2025.
Great. So Tonya is a real expert in this. She's called to speak all over the place. So thank you for your time and joining me in this work. It's really important work, and it's a thrill to work with you.
Thank you.
Okay. So let's start with sort of a grounding and where all this ethnic studies comes from and where it's grounded. And we are using the California Ethnic Studies Model Curriculum, which is adopted by the State Board of Education as our guiding resource and document for schools and districts. So just to give a quick overview on that before we dive into this topic, if you look at it, and you can access it off the CDE website, it's divided into 6 chapters, which you can see here. And we know it's grounded in a number of principles that were approved and qualified in the model curriculum that we follow. I won't go into all of them. You can read some of them here on this slide. But really it looks at our goals and what the work is grounded in. But to start with, we want to talk about identity, because so much around ethnic studies is about recognizing different people's identities and what it means to them and what it should mean to other people, and garnering that respect and understanding to make our society a better one overall. So what does it mean to me? Well, I identify in a lot of different ways. I identify as female, I'm a wife, I'm a mother, I'm an educator, I was the firstborn, I'm Jewish, all of these things. Tonya, talk a little. What does identity mean to you?
I think identity is just so personal, and it's talking about personal characteristics of each individual. And I think that's what's so wonderful about the word, is it can mean different things for different people. But in terms of the educational community, identity really should be and is about personal characteristics that include race, culture, ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, but all sorts of different personal characteristics. As you mentioned, I'm an educator. That's part of my identity. I'm cisgender. That's part of my identity. I'm a cisgender woman. That's part of my identity. So identity can mean different things for each person.
Yeah, we don't want to just characterize people in specific boxes.
Absolutely.
We're complicated individuals, and this is where intersectionality comes into it as well. We're all these different things. We're all unique in different ways. And there's other things too, our likes, our dislikes. I'm a chocolate lover, I'm a chocolate hater, I like spicy food, I don't like, it can mean a lot of different things. Wouldn't you agree?
Definitely. Intersectionality is talking about the overlapping identities that each individual holds in regards to systems of oppression, discrimination, and privilege. So each person is complex, and we have multiple identities, and that's where intersectionality really comes into play.
And we're going to dig into this a little more. Now, the model curriculum, Ethnic Studies model curriculum, really focuses on 4 foundational disciplines. We know that. African American studies, American Indian studies, Chicana, Chicano, Chicanx, Latina, Latino, Latinx studies, and Asian American and Pacific Islanders. But like we were saying, we're so much more than these 4 different ethnicities, aren't we? And that's where we're going to dig in a little bit more into this concept of intersectionality, because it recognizes, and we should recognize, people that have these overlapping identities: a transgender Latina, a Jewish African American. These intersecting identities shape their experiences, how they view the world, and how the world views them as well.
Absolutely.
And so we can dig in for a while. You can read some more about this on this slide, but the model curriculum, fortunately, does spend some time digging into this concept, looking at the historic struggle of different communities of color, but also taking into account those other identities: gender, gender orientation, class, sexuality, many, many, many more. So if we start to peel the onion for each person, we can see there's lots of different things that make up who we are. If we dig into chapter 1 of the model curriculum, you can see more. Here's the 8 outcomes that model curriculum talks about as outcomes for ethnic studies teaching and learning. And you can see there's a number of them there. We can focus on every single one of them. But that last one there, number 5, recognizing intersectionality. All right, so that's our specific focus for today. Not to say the others aren't important, they are, but this broadcast wants to focus on this one. You can see there's some more language, lots of language in the model curriculum that speaks to this. And again, they all contribute to how we perceive ourselves, how others perceive us, how we're treated, how we treat others. And it's very fluid, very, very different depending on our environments. We're going to talk some more about that too with Tonya. Our friends at Facing History and Ourselves have done a great deal of work in this area, and they have some great resources. So this is an example of a worksheet in one of their programs, which I think you can access pretty easily. So here's an example. Here's Stephanie in the middle. Look at all the different things that she identifies as herself. And you could probably add many, many more spokes. If you took the time to do this yourself, I think you'd find it really interesting. Plus, I think it'd be a great exercise for teachers to use in the classroom, right? So I'm not just African American, I'm not just Asian Pacific Islander, I'm so many other things, and makes us very unique and interesting.
Even with staff members, not just with our
Yes.
students.
Yes, good idea, Tonya. That's a great first step for educators as well. This is a great handout too, also from Facing History and Ourselves. Same idea, but you'll notice there's arrows moving out, which is identities, how we see ourselves to the outside world. But you see the arrows coming in, how the outside world views us. So that's an interesting exercise too. You may identify as homosexual to the outside world may view you as something different, positive, maybe not positive. So that's an interesting thing to really get your hands around and think about as well. So again, we recommend that you go to the model curriculum, look at guiding outcome number 5 on recognizing intersectionality, spend a little time on it, and it might help broaden your horizon when you work with your students and keep us away from some of the checkbox stereotyping, pigeonholing that we tend to do. We see so much with census, with demographics, with all kinds of those studies, and really digging deeper and getting to know what that is. They have an excellent lesson too in the model curriculum. Sample lesson 31, you can find it in there. It's called Jewish Americans, Identity, Intersectionality, and Complicating Ideas of Race. The lesson also has this diagram. You might have seen it in different ways, shape, or form. The iceberg. So you know an iceberg, most of it is underwater, unseen. How many of our identities are unseen by the outside world? There's the visible stuff, how tall you are, what color your skin is, your hair, how young you look, how old you look, but we are so much more below the surface, and this is a great example in that lesson.
One of the things with the iceberg that I've seen and heard about, especially under the surface, is where mental health comes into play. And with that being such a big topic of interest right now, especially with intersecting identities, I think that's something to make a note of right now.
That's a really good point, because even though I'm picturing when I was in the classroom, you could tell when kids walk in the door if something's up.
Absolutely.
It may not be quite visible, but when you know your kids, you can tell something's up and you know it's below the surface. takes some time to pull that out,
Right.
understand and react to it. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Tonya. That was a great example. Here's just a number of different things that may be below the surface that you might not see or might not be recognizable. A lot of people can connect to some of these as well. And how many of these things do we purposely keep hidden because we're concerned about it being visible? So that, of course, I think that fits into our topic too. So Tonya, we're talking about intersectionality, and now we want to narrow our focus to LGBTQ+. Why is it so important to focus on that now, during this moment in history?
We're fortunate to live in California, where California has been a trailblazer when it comes to LGBTQ plus individuals, protections, and rights. This moment in history, it really is this interesting dichotomy, if you will, because we have so many robust protections and laws, but we do see city councils, school boards passing anti-trans bills, book bans. So I think that's one of the big things why it's so critical in this moment in history. But another side of it is really recognizing that California has such a diverse population. That includes our students. In California, on average, according to the California Healthy Kids Survey, we have at least 10% of our students identifying as LGBTQ.
That's a lot. Wow.
That's on average. And it's important to note that Los Angeles County, having an even more diverse population, San Diego County, San Francisco County, reporting having even higher numbers, in some cases double that of 10%. Some of the data reports up to 20% of students self-reporting as LGBTQ. So on the average in California, if it's 10%, that's saying, in a class of 40 students, at least 4 of your students are going to be LGBTQ.
So are we seeing the numbers go up in identification? I wanted to ask you this. Are there more people who are now LGBTQ plus, or what is the reason for the increased numbers?
I think there's lots of different theories of why there's increase in identifying students, self-identifying as part of the LGBTQ community. Some of the theories may be that there's simply a name for an identity. There are new names, new identities that are evolving, ever changing, and I think that's part of the complexity and confusion for some adults especially is because the names are changing. So we're definitely going to talk about the terms and the language in a bit.
Okay, thank you.
Another thing that I think is important, I go back to that iceberg that you talked about, is students are telling us, they're reporting to us, and we need to listen to that student voice. Students are telling us that they fear physical violence, especially our trans students. Trans students are twice as likely as non-trans students to report being afraid to come to school or even being beat up, physically assaulted. When it comes to mental health, our trans students, followed by our bisexual students, were most likely to experience chronic sadness. What's important to note about this is chronic sadness is reported as 2 weeks or more, and that is self-reported. So that's, to me, what we need to listen to. We have to listen to the student voice. Some more points that students are reporting. Students are saying that they don't have an adult on campus that they feel cares about them. This first point, I think, is one of the most critical things that educators need to listen to. I get the question often, why do you want to take on this prison project? Because I want to be that caring adult that's going to make a difference and really save and change lives. With student voice, we hear harassment and school safety. We've heard this for decades. This is not new information, but instead the information's getting worse. The numbers are getting worse. So that's why the student voice matters.
I agree. It's really important to listen to students. Educators, teachers want to do that, but what are some things educators can do?
We absolutely have to make sure that the learning environment, the instructional environment, is where we as educators can control that. We can control the instructional environment so that all students feel safe and welcome. But it goes beyond welcome and safe. every student has the right to feel like they belong on that campus. The belonging is a key point. Staff, administrators, counselors, bus drivers, janitors, custodians, everybody is a part of that whole child. And everybody needs to come together and make sure that each child feels that they're safe, supported in that environment. And that is why we need to be a safe and supportive adult on campus. Whether or not you intentionally or unintentionally are that person, we need to be that person.
I'm glad you mentioned all of the support staff as well as the classroom teacher.
Absolutely.
Because kids interact with all of those people, sometimes connect with them more than their own teachers, right? You remember the kid who hangs with the cafeteria person, or the janitor hangs with them. Yeah, I'm glad you talked about those folks too.
And the office clerk.
Yes.
They're front facing of the school.
And to the parents.
And to the parents, the caretakers. Absolutely. It's the whole school community that needs to come together and support each child. One of the biggest pieces of research that has come across my desk recently that I just think is super powerful and important to mention comes from Trevor Project. Just having one supportive adult on campus in the lives of an LGBTQ person reduces the chance of suicide by 40%. So we talked about the average number of LGBTQ students in California as being 10%. So that's quote unquote only 4 kids out of 40. So a lot of times I get a question from adults, well, why are we putting so much effort and resources to only 4 kids? This data point is why it's so important. Because our LGBTQ students aren't just LGBTQ. They're Jewish, they're Chinese American, they're Black, they're African American. They're intersecting identities and different characteristics and qualities that I think is really critical so that we can be that supportive adult.
So I think most educators, I think we'd agree, are very well intentioned. They go into education to help kids, to be with kids, to support them. But there's still a lot of confusion about the terminology and symbols and what you want to use the right terms and don't want to offend. But it seems to be getting more complicated every day. Tonya, help us with this a little bit. What do we need to know about language, symbols, and terminology?
Michelle, this is the most common question I get is another acronym, another term, I can't keep up. And I have to say that, I get asked questions about terms and I don't know. There are new terms that I'm not aware of or I have to learn about. So I think what's critical to know about that is we do need to have a grounding, lay a foundation so that we have a mutual understanding about the vocabulary. And when it comes to the language of LGBTQ students, it is ever changing. It evolves quickly. When it comes to language, it's important to understand that it's different for everybody, but it really is categorized into 3 buckets. What do I mean by buckets? I mean, gender identity, gender expression, and sexual orientation really are the 3 major categories that we're talking about when we're discussing LGBTQ students. When I say gender expression, I think of that starburst activity you explained of, how we present ourselves to others is maybe different than how we think of ourselves.
Oh, okay. Could be different.
Yeah, absolutely. So gender expression is how we present ourselves to the world. For example, we both have jackets on. Is that something that would have been appropriate in the 30s? Maybe not. If we wore a pantsuit in the 20s and 30s, would that be accepted by society as a part of gender expression? Probably not. So it evolves, it changes. Sometimes it changes with our students by class period. How a student presents themselves in physical education may be different in the science class. Very different. When it comes to sexual orientation, that's more interpersonal. Think about sexual orientation in terms of how we connect with another person. whether it be emotionally, physically, romantically. That's our connection with another person. That is not the same as gender expression. And we cannot assume someone's sexual orientation based upon the way they present themselves.
Interesting. Okay. And tell us about gender identity.
Yeah, gender identity is a third bucket, and that's intrapersonal. This is really our internal sense of connection of being a boy or a girl, a man or a woman. For example, I'm a cisgender woman. So that means if I'm cisgender, I was assigned female at birth and I identify as a woman. So my gender identity is I'm a woman. Okay. That's gender identity. And these three buckets are very connected but very different. And I think the biggest takeaway for educators is we cannot assume gender identity, sexual orientation based upon someone's expression.
So if I identify as a female, I may be oriented differently, maybe to a male, maybe to a female.
Absolutely.
And I may present myself maybe as a female, maybe as a male, right?
Or maybe more masculine or feminine or even somewhere in between or androgynous. Gender expression is very fluid. One of my favorite examples that I'd like to give about gender expression is during distance learning, during the pandemic when we were working remotely. I think it's fair to say that we dressed probably a little bit different when we were teaching and learning and working remotely.
Yes, a little more informal. Yeah.
Most likely.
Yeah, okay.
Absolutely.
It's good to separate those. And so SOGI is the acronym for?
Yeah, SOGI is sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression.
Okay.
It's not a common acronym. And for those that are intimidated by acronym, we don't need to use it. It's just a shortcut.
Okay,
Yeah,
good. Thank you.
Good one. I think what's really important to kind of elaborate about these three categories is to understand that everybody's intersecting identities come into play on when somebody is coming to terms with their sexual orientation or their gender identity. And that may come into play with how they express themselves as well and their gender expression. Breaking through the binary this is a new concept or newer concept. I would say in the past, 6 to 8 years, we've heard about this new binary system. So is it new? No. It's just we have a term breaking through the binary, which is saying, we don't have those distinct, concrete, opposite examples of being male and female. It goes beyond male and female options. And in California, we actually have non-binary options that are required in the school community. We have to allow students, staff, and families the option to identify male, female, or non-binary. And that is part of California legislation.
Okay, good. Thank you. It's a confusing one.
It is. It can be. I think what's really important to think about when we're talking about the binary system is it can be a continuum. So I'd like to introduce a video. This person does just a beautiful job explaining their role of identity and how they feel with competing identities and intersecting identities. So I'm gonna let the video speak for itself.
Kate Ulundai Barrett, activist, cultural worker, and disability justice advocate. Race and disability, race and gender, race and class. I can't go to a store or a doctor's office or a date and not be seen as brown, trans with a cane. There's no way. And I'm not gonna choose any of those things. I do not want to minimize or dictate how people live and experience and identify. Intersectionality is really super critical to me. I'm not just attacked because I'm trans. I'm attacked because I'm brown and I'm disabled. People are being imprisoned, criminalized, harmed, not given jobs, not given medical support. They're not adequately being loved. It's critical that we get those resources, and it's critical that we get those resources from that community. Every day I'll be on a train and someone will, try to get a seat at the, disability access seating. And depending on that person, depending on how they see me and my masculinity, right? Brown masculinity is not supposed to be vulnerable. Gender nonconformity, are you a boy or a girl? And then I'm young, so you're not really disabled. So all of these things are coming into play on a frequent basis. And that happens when I'm at the medical office, when I'm with the doctor, how many times I'm misgendered. So if they see my brownness, we just want to talk about your brownness. When I'm in white queer spaces, like, let's just talk about you being transgender or queer. When I'm in very able-bodied, fit, radical people of color spaces, they don't really want to discuss access or the needs of my community being disabled. Real talk, white people are treated very different in the trans community than brown people, than black people, than Latino people. Real talk, people with disabilities, oftentimes it's a lot of white people, cis-sexual, rich people who can afford healthcare, and that is not my community. For me, what's super pivotal is to acknowledge that race doesn't just move everything along, but that it interprets and informs all the other parts of me. It's because somebody is brown and trans. It is because somebody is physically disabled or perceived as crazy, right? And brown and black. And those things inform each other. When somebody says, oh, that trans person of color is so lazy, they don't know how to get a job. Well, A, that's ableism. They think that they can't work. B, cis-sexism, and C, anti-blackness or racism, right? So all of those things are tools, are weapons happening simultaneously on me, on you. I think it's really critical that we engage in dialogues that might make us uncomfortable. If we don't address that depth, our level of depth, and also the level of depth to which we are being harmed and limited, I don't think we're going to be able to really do groundbreaking work or innovative work to address our needs. And in order to do so, we have to not just see race in a vacuum.
Wow, that is a really powerful video, and I'm sure there's lots of experiences of other individuals who can speak to those same feelings that emerged from this person talking on there. It really, to me, and I'm sure to others, really helps us understand the importance of intersectionality and how these different identities impact how we feel, what we've been saying, how we feel about ourselves and how others treat us during different times and different spaces. Let's dig in a little more. Help us unpack this further, Tonya.
For sure. I would encourage you, if you're watching this video right now, maybe even to replay that video. Pause it and as you ask that question, Michelle, because it's really important to understand that with our intersecting identities, there may be part of your identity that you feel safe and secure and connected with in certain spaces. Or there may be another part of your identity that may be below the surface of the iceberg, or that you don't feel connected to or safe in certain spaces. Let me give you an example. You may have somebody who's a black trans female. She may feel really comfortable about her racial equality, racial discrimination in that space with other people that are black. But when it comes to gender issues, she may not feel connected or that she's a part of it. Instead, she may feel excluded or even more so marginalized. Or the opposite may be true. She may be around other trans folks and feel connected to racial things or gender issues. So it really does depend on the space and in some cases, the level of safety and comfort.
Interesting. So in different settings, you could have different feelings of comfort.
Absolutely.
based on those specific identity characteristics.
Definitely. And that's why it goes back to our role as educators. What can we do? We can set a stage where we can make every person feel safe and welcome and a sense of belonging no matter what their identity is.
And we see that a lot in high schools with clubs.
Definitely.
So if there's an LGBTQ plus club, students that identify in those ways can come together, feel safe. But other groups have clubs, right? African American clubs, Jewish clubs, French clubs. I think that provides those little tiny pockets of safety within the larger diverse environment.
Yeah,
right?
definitely. And I think it's really important with those GSAs, also known as gender and sexuality alliances. What you're saying, Michelle, is, you may feel like you're a part of the GSA, right?
Yeah.
You may feel that you're in with that GSA, but in some schools, what we found during the pandemic, a lot of those GSAs dissolved. And we're really struggling in California to get them back into fruition and moving forward. But a lot of those clubs closed or dissolved during the pandemic because of lack of safety. So they're finding solace in a Jewish American club, the drama club, the art club, the robotics club, whatever it may be. So the idea is to have a peer affinity group on campus that students can feel safe and connected to.
So teachers that sponsor those clubs, they're playing a really important role.
Critical.
That's great.
Critical.
They often don't get the credit
Life-saving.
they deserve, I think. That's
I
wonderful.
believe it's life-saving.
Oh, yeah.
But just to circle back and kind of close out the thought about the video, there are many examples where we do have intersecting identities. And in that video, the person talked about having a disability, but not feeling seen because they're young. And to me, that just is so telling from their point of view.
Okay, so one of the other goals of ethnic studies, like we said, was to surface the stories, the contributions of all groups, individuals in all groups, past, present, to help students identify with the positive aspect, to empower them that even if you feel you're discriminated against, you can still be a contributing member of our democratic society. So, for example, and although a lot of those stories are not reflected in our standard history books, I think every student in California, if not the United States, knows the Martin Luther King story. But how many of them know the Bayard Rustin story, who was self-identified publicly as a gay man? He was African American, and he led the March on Washington. I think there's some movies and documentaries out on him. This is an important story, especially when you see it and learn about it and what he went through too with the discrimination. But we know there's other examples. Can you lift up a couple of those for us, Tonya?
Yeah, I think the most common that we are aware of is Harvey Milk, right?
Yes.
Harvey Milk became the first openly gay man elected to public office in the United States. In 1977, Milk was elected to San Francisco Board of Supervisors. What's important about Harvey Milk, especially for us as educators, is Milk fought against the Briggs Initiative, which really was targeting and aiming to get LGBTQ educators from being allowed to teach in California. So Harvey Milk had a huge role in making sure that LGBTQ educators were not discriminated against. And unfortunately, Harvey Milk was assassinated in November 27th of 1978.
So I'm glad you brought up his contribution, because a lot of people know him about the assassination, but not really what his effort and work was with this Briggs Initiative. So that's the takeaway in learning
Absolutely.
about Harvey Milk. But there's others.
Yeah, what about science? How many of us think about a key person in the science field who really made major contributions to the LGBTQ movement? Some of you may be thinking of specific people, but how many of you actually are thinking about Dr. Margaret Chung? Michelle and I talked about Dr. Margaret Chung, and both of us were excited to learn more about Margaret Chung because she was the first female Chinese American practicing physician in California. She was a woman that became a physician in San Francisco, but what was really important about her, this was taking place in a time period where Chinese American folks and LGBTQ folks didn't have safe space. So she played a huge role in providing a safe space and protection to Chinese American and LGBTQ folks. She fought for Chinese American rights, advocacy, but also for LGBTQ rights and protections.
Great, wonderful. I don't think many know her story.
Many people
I didn't
do not.
before this. That's
Absolutely.
great. Thank you for sharing that one. And there's others.
Yes. What about human rights? Can we think of any folks that were maybe trailblazers when it comes to human rights with LGBTQ contributions? There's somebody by the name of Ron Grayson. And I wonder, if you were to Google Ron Grayson, you actually are going to have to do some digging to find out more about Ron Grayson, who was the founder of the Association of Black Gays. Why is this so important? Because he led and fought against the inequalities and discrimination that LGBTQ people of color were experiencing in Los Angeles communities. He planned and executed boycotts of LGBTQ establishments that denied entry to Black people. So LGBTQ establishments that were denying the rights of Black people to attend.
Wow, that's a great example. So I'm thinking even during Black History Month,
Right.
where we highlight, is Ron Grayson part of that celebration?
We
Part
hope
of that
so
story?
moving forward.
Yes.
We
Good
hope
one.
so
Good-
moving
good
forward.
point.
Ron Grayson also helped to fight against police brutality that was happening early on against LGBTQ people of color. So he had a huge pivotal role against LGBTQ folks that are Black. When it comes to historical events, there are major historical events that come to mind. I think when we're talking about the impacted lives of LGBTQ folks, most of us automatically think about Stonewall, right? The Stonewall riots. But 3 years prior to Stonewall, there's something called the Compton Cafeteria riots. So Compton Cafeteria was happening in San Francisco, and there's something called the Compton Cafeteria, which was basically a cafeteria, a restaurant, if you will, where queer folks, specifically trans folks, and even drag queens constantly would come here to feel safe. They would come here to have coffee, snacks, and food come together because it was literally a place where they could be protected and feel safe. On August 1966, a group of trans women and drag queens actually were enjoying their coffee, a late night event at this cafeteria, and they were being physically assaulted and harassed. So they organized a fight back, and it was the first time in history that trans folks fought back against physical brutality, and there were police involved in this brutality
This is before
as well.
Stonewall.
Before Stonewall.
Wow. Didn't know that story.
And 3 years later, Stonewall, similar thing happened in New York City. Another thing was the Mattachine Society. This was a group of folks, this was almost like a secret society of activists and gay rights activists that were coming together to talk about experiences that they were living through. What are the things that they could do to move forward so that they could not just survive but thrive, because they were being harassed on a daily basis. And this group was coming together and coming up with ways and strategizing on different ways and forms of advocacy. Another point of history is the Lavender Scare. The Lavender Scare. This is a really big one because this was happening simultaneously to the Red Scare, which you're very familiar with.
Yeah, well, that's in all the history books, the Red Scare,
Absolutely.
but not this so much.
Right. So same concept, Lavender Scare, is talking about how there's a target against LGBTQ folks and a persecution of LGBTQ people because they were quote unquote subject to blackmail. So people were being persecuted and jobs being lost if you were LGBTQ, and people were being blackmailed during this time period, and that was known as the Lavender Scare. This Lavender Scare time period was one of the big things that laid the groundwork for future legislation so that there are protections regulations, and policies to protect LGBTQ employees, but also just citizens.
Thank you, Tonya. That's just a few examples, and we were really glad to see the Fair Education Act come into our world here in California. Senate Bill 48 signed into law in 2012, which requires all history teachers in California to recognize contributions of people with disabilities, people of LGBTQ plus identities, and other ethnic and cultural groups. So these stories are starting to move into the history textbooks here in California, and thanks to you, we're heightened our understanding and importance of that too. But along those lines, we know there's still a number of, you talked to us about the language, symbols. So the symbols too, and the use of symbols are very powerful in telling of these stories and helping us understand further. But that changes a lot too. So help us unpack the symbols issues in helping understand and relate to LGBTQ plus community.
And there are a lot of symbolism when it comes to activism, pride, but also remembrance. One of the things historians are well aware of is the pink triangle. The upside down pink triangle actually comes from World War II, right?
During the Holocaust.
Absolutely. And a pink triangle was used to identify gay men. And those gay men were persecuted and murdered in concentration camps.
They had to wear it publicly.
They had to wear it publicly.
Just as the Jews had to wear the yellow stars publicly, gay men had to wear the upside down pink triangle to be identified on the street.
And so the pink triangle was actually reclaimed by the LGBTQ community as a symbol of pride but remembrance. And I think that's really important, not only for the LGBTQ movement, but for the Holocaust as well. The rainbow flag, I think, is just this universal symbol of pride for the LGBTQ community. The rainbow flag originally had different layers and different stripes of color representing something different. For example, life, unity, sunlight, which those are beautiful symbols of the meanings behind those symbols. There were additional shades originally, pink and turquoise in that rainbow flag, but they were removed because this was happening in the late 70s, and it simply goes down to fabric. There wasn't pink and turquoise fabric available in abundance, and that's why it was removed
I didn't know that.
From the rainbow flag. Fun fact.
Interesting.
Then there's the trans pride flag. That actually came out later in 1990, and that's talking about pride for those that are transgender. And this was new. This is a new symbol. The more recent one is known as the Progress Pride flag. This has come out in the past decade, and this is where we've added a non-binary segment to it. We've added black and brown stripes. And this is really talking about people of color, recognizing people of color, LGBTQ people that are also black or brown.
So that's like the Ron Grayson story. They didn't have that then.
Correct.
He would like that.
Absolutely.
So show us. So we see the pink triangle. How about the one on the right, the pink and the light blue?
The symbol on the upper right is light blue, or baby blue, if you will, and light pink, or baby pink, if you will, and white. Those colors were intentionally chosen by the artist because it's to symbolize the traditional colors of being a baby boy or a baby girl.
Oh.
So when a baby's born, traditionally, if it was a boy, they were
blue or pink.
Yes.
And the white?
That is actually symbolism for somebody who may be in transitioning if they're a trans individual.
Okay. And then on the lower left?
That is late 70s. That's the original rainbow flag.
But there's pink and turquoise in there.
Yeah, that's the one
before those colors were removed.
They were
Interesting.
removed in about 1979.
Okay.
Yes.
And then we're starting to see this one on the lower right.
Yes, the lower right is the Progress Pride flag. And actually here at LACO, Los Angeles County Office of Education, in June 2023, we had a Progress Pride flag erected during the month of June for
wonderful.
Pride Month.
So I see now the brown and black you referenced, the pink and blue and the white,
Yes.
the circle in the yellow triangle.
Yes, the circle in the yellow triangle, that's probably the newest addition, and that's representing folks that are intersex.
Okay. Gotcha.
Intersex people.
Interesting. All right, there'll probably be new versions of flags coming out.
Yes, ever changing and evolving. And I think with language and symbolism, it is evolving, it is ever changing, and it's our job to educate ourselves. So what I'd like to do is just summarize a bit, if I may, Michelle. As educators, we're just kind of, like you said, unpeeling the onion layer by layer, right? We're just skimming the surface and delving into the intersection of ethnic studies and LGBTQ movements. But we have to recognize the need to incorporate more. We have a diverse population in this state and in this country, and we need to make sure that we're incorporating it into all of our curriculum to make sure that we're creating a safe and supportive learning environment for all of our students. We need to make sure that our students feel that they belong. This is my favorite quote from Nelly Barrero, says, "Diversity is a fact, but inclusion is a choice we make every day." As leaders, we have to put out the message that we embrace and not just tolerate diversity. And if you're watching this broadcast, you're more than likely a leader, no matter what your role is.
Well said. Thank you so much, Tonya. You know, I think most educators go into the profession because they want to do well by children, young and older kids as well, elementary all the way up through high school or even beyond. And we've always worked hard to make it safe. We know that kids can't learn if they don't feel safe, if they don't feel welcome. We've gone to great lengths to make students of different ethnicities feel safe. This is equally important, as it is to make important their identities, their religions, their orientations, their abilities or disabilities, all of those things. So thank you for opening our eyes to this specific topic, and we hope that it's useful to our educational community. We're looking forward to more work with the PRISM Project. We know that's going to be a great resource too.
Thank you, Michelle.
Yeah, so thank you so much. And thank you to all of you for watching, opening your eyes, ears, and listening and wanting to understand more. We're all learning all the time. Things change. We want to keep up if we want to do right by all our students. So thank you for your commitment to ethnic studies and the ever-broadening context in which that work needs to occur. Thank you.